A diamond ring sits in a velvet box under a jeweler's light, throwing fractured fire across the ceiling. The single most romantic object a person can give another. It is sold as something rare, something eternal, something that holds its value the way love is supposed to hold. Almost none of that is true. In a guarded vault on another continent sit more diamonds than the world could wear in a lifetime, stockpiled in the dark, deliberately kept from ever reaching a single shop window. The most romantic object on earth is also one of the most successful marketing operations in human history. This is the story of how that happened. For most of recorded history, diamonds were not the symbol of eternal love. They were simply hard, clear stones, admired occasionally but not adored. They appeared in the crowns of a handful of European monarchs and the treasuries of Indian and Persian rulers, because for centuries the only known sources were a few riverbeds in India and much later the gravel of Brazil. A diamond was something most people would live their whole lives without ever seeing. They were scarce by accident, not by design. There were only so many, found in only so many places, sifted slowly by hand from rivers and earth. That genuine rarity gave them a quiet, limited prestige, the prestige of a thing that simply could not be had in quantity. Then in the 1870s, the accident ended, and it ended in a place no one had been watching. In the dry, hard ground of southern Africa, near a settlement that would grow into the town of Kimberley, prospectors began pulling diamonds out of the earth, not from rivers, not by the handful, but straight from the rock, by the bucket and the cartload. What had been one of the rarest substances on the planet was suddenly catastrophically abundant. Thousands of diggers descended on the region. They carved a single enormous pit into the ground by hand, a crater so vast it is still called the Big Hole, and the diamonds kept coming. For anyone who understood markets, this was not a fortune. It was a disaster waiting to happen, because the entire value of a diamond rested on one fragile idea, that there were very few of them. Flood the world with stones and the price would collapse to almost nothing. Into this chaos stepped a young Englishman named Cecil Rhodes. Rhodes had arrived in Africa as a sickly teenager, sent for his health, and discovered in the diamond fields a talent that mattered far more than digging. He understood, earlier and more coldly than anyone around him, that the man who controlled the supply of a thing controlled its worth, and therefore controlled everything. While the other diggers raced to pull as much from the ground as they possibly could, Rhodes did the opposite. He began buying out his rivals, claim by claim, mine by mine, often when they were desperate or in debt, patiently consolidating the chaos of the fields into a single, disciplined hand. In 1888, he merged the largest operations into one company and gave it the name of the farm where some of the first stones were found, De Beers. Rhodes's insight was simple and ruthless. The way to make diamonds valuable again was not to find more, it was to control how many the world was ever allowed to see. By the end of the century, De Beers controlled the overwhelming majority of the world's diamond production. The accidental scarcity of the old world had been replaced by something new, a scarcity that was manufactured, deliberate, and entirely under one company's control. The principle was almost insultingly simple. Dig up as many diamonds as the earth would give, then release only a trickle and lock the rest away. If a new region produced too many stones, De Beers bought up the surplus and buried it in vaults rather than let it reach the market. If demand softened, supply was quietly cut to match. The price never fell year after year, decade after decade, not because the world ran short of diamonds, but because the company simply would not let it fall. After Rhodes, the company passed into the hands of a financier named Ernest Oppenheimer, who refined the machine into something even more total. Oppenheimer understood that controlling the mines was not enough. To control the price, you had to control the channel through which every diamond reached the world. So De Beers built one. It was called, with bureaucratic blandness, the Central Selling Organization, a single funnel through which a vast share of the world's rough diamonds was forced to pass. Independent producers, even those who resented the company and wanted nothing to do with it, found it nearly impossible to sell their stones outside the system without watching their prices crumble. The cartel did not merely own mines, it owned the door, and almost every diamond on earth had to pass through it. Rough stones flowed into London, were sorted and valued, and were offered to a small, hand-picked circle of buyers at events where the price was simply announced. You did not negotiate, you accepted or you left. It was, by any honest definition, one of the most effective and longest-running cartels the modern world had ever seen. But the company had solved only half of its problem. It could control how many diamonds reached the market. What it could not yet control was whether anyone actually wanted them. And by the 1930s, in its single most important market, the answer was drifting toward indifference. In the United States, in the grip of the Great Depression, diamonds were a luxury few could justify. Prices were soft. The young, who were supposed to buy them, were unconvinced. A diamond was a stone you could not eat and could barely resell. The cartel had mastered supply. Now it needed to manufacture demand. And so, in 1938, De Beers turned to the one industry built entirely on making people want things: advertising. It hired an American agency, N.W. Ayer, and asked a question that would reshape an entire culture. Not, how do we sell more diamonds? But something deeper, how do we make a diamond mean? Something it had never meant before. The agency's answer was audacious. They would not sell the stone. They would sell an idea, and attach the stone to it so tightly that the two could never again be separated. The idea was love, permanent, unbreakable, once-in-a-lifetime love. A diamond, they decided, would no longer be a luxury. It would become the required physical proof that a man's love was real. The campaign was patient, and it was enormous. It placed diamonds in films and on the fingers of movie stars, sent lecturers into high schools to speak to young women about engagement, and seeded magazines with images of glamorous couples. It never shouted. It only suggested, again and again, that a proper engagement meant a diamond, and, more quietly still, that the size of the stone was a fair measure of the depth of a man's love. There was no single product being advertised. De Beers' name was barely mentioned. The agency was selling a tradition and inventing it at the same time. But the campaign was still missing the thing that turns an idea into a belief. It was missing a single perfect line. For years, a copywriter at the agency named Frances Geraghty carried that burden. She was looking for a phrase that could hold the entire idea, eternity, love, and value, in a handful of words. According to the story she later told, the breakthrough came late one night in 1947. Exhausted, half asleep at her desk, she scribbled a line almost as an afterthought and went to bed, unsure it was any good. The line was 4 words long. A diamond is forever. It was, in its way, a quiet masterpiece. In 4 words it made a cold mineral synonymous with eternity itself. It told every couple, without ever quite saying so, that a diamond was not a purchase but a vow, and that to ever part with it, to ever sell it, would be to sell the love itself. That last part was the most cunning of all. By making the diamond forever, the campaign also made it almost impossible to resell. Nobody puts their marriage back on the market. The stones stayed in drawers and on fingers, never returning to compete with new supply. The slogan worked beyond anything the company could have hoped. It would be repeated, in one form or another, for the rest of the century. Within a single generation, the diamond engagement ring went from an uncommon gesture to an unquestioned ritual across the United States, and then, market by market, across much of the world. A custom that had barely existed was now treated as ancient and natural, as though couples had always sealed their love with a diamond. They had not. The tradition was, in large part, written by an advertising agency and underwritten by a cartel. And here lies the quiet truth beneath the fire of every stone. The diamonds were never scarce. The mines held, and still hold, more than the world could ever wear. The shortage was a decision, enforced by vaults and a controlled door. The romance was scarcer still. It was composed in advertising offices, refined over decades, and crowned by 4 words written by an exhausted woman who, reportedly, never married and never wore a diamond engagement ring herself. In the years since, the cartel's iron grip has loosened. New sources emerged, regulators circled, and the old monopoly is no longer what it was. But the belief it built has outlived the machine that built it. Because the most valuable thing De Beers ever sold was never the stone in the box. It was the certainty around it. A certainty passed down now from one generation to the next as pure instinct, repeated in jewelry shops and whispered proposals every single day, that this cold, common, beautiful rock is somehow the truest possible measure of love. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. Knowing exactly how the spell was cast, knowing the scarcity was staged and the meaning was written, and reaching still for the ring.